through it. If we get some others to join, then fantastic. But good afternoon and welcome to today's cybersecurity webinar, Passwords. Why are we still talking about this in 2019? I'm Carrie Novak, and I'm Goodell.net's Training and Development Leader. So thank you for taking some time to be here today. Leading our webinar today is Scott Mitchell. Scott works in our Strategic Services Department as our Product Manager. He's been with us for 3 years. Scott is an obvious choice for leading today's webinar because he has partnered with many of our clients to give them peace of mind through our cybersecurity product Guru Sentry. Scott will be happy to answer any questions at the end of his presentation today. Questions can also be submitted via chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask him directly. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send that recording out after the call. Included with that recording will be a brief survey. So if you have some time, we would love it if you could take a moment, fill it out, give us some suggestions on how we can improve. And without further ado, Scott, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me ramble on about stuff that I find important, and hopefully you find important too. Let's talk about passwords. About why they matter. A little FAQ, give you some tips, and then the stuff that people really like is how to manage all of your passwords, because it's impossible to remember 100 different passwords nowadays, and then a few key takeaways. So why passwords still matter in 2019, or well, very shortly 2020. That's coming up quick. The fact is that you still need one for every single thing that you log into. Right? There are other options for logging in, like shortened PIN codes or biometrics, like a fingerprint or a face or all that kind of stuff. But all of those things are predicated on a password. They're kind of shortcuts for a password. So we still have to have passwords. We have to talk about them. Because of that, it actually takes the password itself in order to encrypt any data. All of those shortcuts, they can't stand alone. They can't encrypt data on their own. So they're just for ease of use and convenience, really. The password is the key. And of course, passwords can be recovered either by yourself or by the bad guys, and they can be changed. So we have to stay on top of our password policy and make sure that we set them appropriately. So what makes a good password? There's a couple of pretty easy and perhaps obvious things. Length and complexity are the two primary ones. If your password is short, it's easy to crack or guess. And if it's simple, it's especially easy to crack or guess. Additionally, not using the same password for all of your websites or logins is also really, really important, because even if you've got a decent password, it could be by a bad guy, a hacker specifically trying to get your password, or it could be leaked. I mean, in the last year alone, there have been countless companies in the news where, they had a big data breach, and now everybody's usernames and passwords are out in the wild. So, in a way, it doesn't matter how good your password is, because there's always the possibility there. If someone gets your password for Gmail or something like that, it's not a far stretch to think, well, I can try Bank of America, I can try Commerce Bank, I can try Facebook and LinkedIn and all these other things with the same password. And a lot of times they've got access to everything. So not using the same password everywhere is also critically important. So one of the big questions we get a lot is, what about frequent password change policies? This used to be much more common a long time ago. If you worked somewhere and they had a password policy that they were really proud of, they would make you change your password every 30 days or 90 days if they were feeling, nice, or 6 months or a year or something like that. That sounds like a great idea. If you keep mixing it up, the bad guys are less likely to figure it out. But what that idea fails to take into consideration is human nature. You know, if you were to ask me to come up with one good password, I could do that. But a month from now, if you ask me to do it again, I'll put a little bit less effort into it, and then the following month and the following month. Before too long, I'm just making it easy for myself to remember. You know, I changed my password from Fido to Fido1 to Fido2 to Fido3, or, you know, I start writing them down on a sticky note or saving them in a Word document on my desktop that's, you know, titled passwords, do not look here, or something like that. So human nature will shortcut this this intent, you know, good intention of changing your passwords often, and really it's not necessary as long as you have a good password in the first place. So let's talk about password length first of all. It's easy to see, and I'm not going to run down the whole list here, but it's easy to see even with really simple, really awful passwords, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, just adding single character in length greatly reduces the time that a password cracking algorithm would take in order to crack it. Just the first two lines here, you go from 7 characters to 8 characters, and you go from a teeny tiny fraction of a second to 5 hours. And that alone, you know, most of the time, if a hacker is actually running some kind of a password cracking algorithm against your login, there's no way that they'll even be allowed to run it for 5 hours. The systems are smart nowadays, and they'll identify what's going on and they'll shut it down, you know, really, really quickly. So even adding a single character at that point would make a huge impact. But you can just go down the list, 9, 10, 11, 12 characters. It goes to days, to months, to decades, to centuries. And that's, you know, if they could sit there and have that password cracking algorithm just run constantly, nonstop, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, weekends and holidays, completely interrupted, you know, it would take, you know, forever if you've got a sufficiently long, even though it's simple and kind of a terrible password, if it's sufficiently long, it would take forever to guess. However, we can make this quite a lot better without making a really, really long password. So if you combine letters and numbers, so look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's it can be cracked so many times in a heartbeat, you know, it's ridiculous. But if you just change one digit from a number to a letter, it makes things far more complex, and it takes 30 years to crack it. So obviously, when setting passwords, we want to integrate letters and numbers. Get even better, we can go lowercase and uppercase numbers, and we can add symbols. So password, the worst password in the history of passwords. And all this kind of cracks me up. It says this is cracked in slightly less time than the speed of light. Well, the speed of light to what? It doesn't really matter. The speed of light from you know, across 1 micron or something. Password is incredibly terrible. But you could still use your password as password if you just gave it a capital P, an @ symbol, a 0 for the O, and a capital D. It takes a terrible password and makes it, you know, uncrackable for 14 years. And for reference, this song by Mariah Carey, which I have to admit I'm not familiar with, was Top of the Pops 14 years ago. So that's quite a long time. So if we're asking, actually, I've got something fun we can try here real quick since we've got plenty of time. Let's think of a decent password. Well, let's use Carrie as a password since she's leading this here thing. Carrie, if your password is Carrie, that's terrible. It gets cracked in 1 second and 70 jiffies and 70 milliseconds. And by the way, a jiffy is actually a real measurement of time. I looked this up just before we got started here. A jiffy is equal to the time it takes light to travel 1 centimeter in a vacuum, just so you know. So if you didn't learn anything else at all today, at least you've got that to take away with you.
Yes,
So how can we make
I can guarantee you that I do not use the password carry. So yay, I'm already winning. So we're good.
But you can't tell us that. You're narrowing it down. Now we know it's not carry. It's going to be
Yeah.
something else. So let's see if we can make this better. We'll go carry 1. Yeah, it takes a whole 2 minutes. How about capital K, E, or sorry, 3 for the E, RR, and then a exclamation point. I. Takes a whole 6 minutes. So it's still too short. How about Carrie is the greatest? So this isn't really what you'd call a password. This is a passphrase. And these are great and highly recommended because they're long, but it's not some random series of numbers and letters and characters that you have to try and remember. It's really easy to remember phrases. The human brain can remember sentences just as well as they can remember words. So if you want to make your password better, instead of just having it be Fido, I love my dog Fido, and that makes it far, far better. Look at that. Fido, 4 seconds, or all lowercase. I love my dog Fido. 119 millennia. I think the bad guys will have moved on by the time they get that cracked. So you can see length and complexity. I mean, just it's obvious that these things are important. So if you can't, let's get my presentation back up. Difficulties, bear with me. All right, so if you're supposed to have long, complex passwords that are different for every login you have, and you probably have 100 of them, how in the world are you supposed to remember all these? At this point, usually people's eyes glaze over and they say, forget about it. I'm just going to go back to my sticky notes on my monitor. Well, there's these wonderful little tools called password managers. I use one. Pretty much everyone I know at GoodellNet uses one. And anybody that really cares about strong passwords and being able to remember them all uses something like this too. You could always, open up a note on your iPhone or your Android and just store your notes or your passwords in there and rely on the 4 or 6 digit pin on your phone to keep that secure. But really, that's not a whole lot better than a sticky note on your monitor. So these password tools that are out there, and there's a few examples like LastPass, 1Password, KeyPass, and there's a few others. Personally, I use LastPass. I recommend this to everyone I talk to. These are fantastic. Of course, they're online based. They're fully encrypted. They've got the strongest security of any other companies out there, which is to say, admittedly, that they are not perfect. There is always the possibility that any website, if you put it on the internet, there is a possibility that there could be a breach. I mean, everything we do online comes with a balance of risk to reward. You have to decide for yourself, is it worth taking this risk for the benefits that I'm going to get? And in my mind, this is an easy and absolute yes, because if you're not going to use a password manager tool, you're going to use some other less secure method to remember all your passwords, write them down, or you're going to have a bunch of logins that all have the same password. And I genuinely think that this is a really good, strong bet to go with one of these. Now, we use LastPass, or I do anyway. There's a free version and there's a paid version. Um, Nobody really needs the paid version. It's got a bunch of neat features in it. We can take a look at that real quick. Um, Here's the website. Plenty of free features here. It shares across all devices. So there's a Google Chrome plugin. I'm sure there's a Firefox and a Safari plugin and all that. You can get it on your iPhone, your Android, and it's all shares the same account. But it's neat because it can generate passwords for you. So when you create a new login to some new website and you're registering for the first time, you type in your email address and then it says, would you like for us to recommend a password? And it's some ridiculous 20 character long combination of uppercase and lowercase and numbers and symbols and all this kind of stuff that nobody would ever, ever, ever be able to crack. And the beauty is you don't have to remember it. It generates it for you and then it stores it for you. The next time you go back to that website, if you have this feature turned on, it will just automatically populate your username and password there in the field, and you click sign in, and you can totally forget what your password is because this tool remembers it. Of course, to access the tool, you have to have one master password, and that's why they call this LastPass. It's like the last password you'll ever have to remember. So the password that you set for LastPass needs to be a good, strong password that you can remember, or a nice passphrase like Carrie is the greatest or something like that. You can all use that. um, but as long as you remember that one password, this can store all of your other passwords. And it has other form fill features and a lot of other things like that. So it's very secure, it's very convenient. And now that I've been using it for a couple of years, I can't possibly imagine um, going back to life without it. Highly recommended. Okay, above and beyond passwords, because every login needs a password. That's a fact. We can make it even better using something called multi-factor authentication. A lot of people are aware of this. Some people have heard the term but don't know what it means. Too many syllables, I think, and their eyes kind of glaze over and they just say, no, thank you. I'll just stick with my password Fido for now. Thank you very much. But this is really a wonderful thing that gives two layers of logging in to whichever website you've got it set it up on. And not all websites offer this, although it's becoming far more common to the point that I would say at least 50% of the things that I log into nowadays offer it. So it's a technology that requires you to use more than one authentication factor. So that could be, and then in a general sense here, multi-factor authentication means like a password and a fingerprint, or a password and a USB dongle that you plug into the side of your laptop, or much more commonly, a password and an authenticator app. In the olden days, and in computer terms, I'm talking 2 years ago, the olden days, these came in the form of a little plastic keychain that your work provided you, and it would randomly generate a 6-digit code on the little cheap LED screen, and it would change it every 10 seconds or so. So when you're going to log into work, you type in your password, and then you look at your keychain and you see that 6-digit number there, and that correlates exactly to the 6-digit code that the system is expecting from you. So the neat thing there is, if you lose your password, if somebody cracks your password, or if there's a big breach and your password ends up out in the wild, that's fine, because the bad guy can go to the website and type in your username and password, but they don't have your keychain, so they can't complete the login. Well, that's a little bit old school, and nowadays, now that everybody has a smartphone, they've replaced the little keychain with an app, and there's a variety of different apps. There's Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, and there's a ton of other ones out there, and they all do the same thing. But basically, you can have, in the app, you can have multiple different websites stored, and for each website, there's a little 6-digit number that is generated, and it changes every 10 or 15 seconds or so, and it serves the same purpose. So you go to your website, you type in your username and password, and then you pull out your phone and you look at the little 6-digit number, which only you have, nobody else in the world has that, and you type in that 6-digit number and you're in. It's not that inconvenient really at all, and it is orders of magnitude more secure than going with just a password alone. Another option that takes that to a whole nother level are these MFA apps like Microsoft Authenticator that make this even more convenient. So we use Microsoft Authenticator here at GoodellNet, and for some of our logins, you don't even have to type in the 6-digit passcode. When we are logging into Office 365, for example, we type in our username and password, and behind the scenes, Office 365 sends a login request to our Microsoft Authenticator app. And instead of having to pull up in the app and find the 6-digit code and type it in, my phone or my Apple Watch, for example, will just ding and alert me, and I'll look down at my watch and it will say, such and such is asking for permission to log in, and I can just tap approve on my watch, and I'm in. It's fantastic. It doesn't get much more convenient for that, and it's vastly superior in security. Single sign-on is another method, often used with full stacks of programs. So like the Microsoft stack, for example, you're signing into your computer, you're signing into OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams and Office 365 and Outlook and all these different things. So this is a way to consolidate your logins, essentially. You sign in once, and then when you open a new tab to go to, say, SharePoint, for example, your computer is already authenticated as logged in properly with the other Office 365 app that you're logged into, and it accepts that and moves on. So it's a convenience feature. It makes life easier and signing in quicker. But again, everything's a trade-off. So that convenience comes with the fact that you certainly need to have a good, strong password for whatever that is. So in conclusion, as they say, you should always use different passwords for every application. It doesn't do any good to come up with a good, strong password and then use it everywhere because, like I said, a breach could make that password, end up out in the wild, and then all of your accounts are free for the picking. Definitely use multi-factor authentication whenever you can. It only takes a minute or two to set up, and then you've got it, and it only adds a couple of seconds to your login every time. And if you've got that type like with the Microsoft Authenticator app, it doesn't even take that long. You just tap approve and you're in. And then the last thing is, and this is the thing that I stress a lot to most people, especially it's free and it makes life easy and you don't have to remember a ton of different passwords. Get a password manager tool. LastPass, OnePass, KeyPass, whatever. We're not sponsored by any of these. We don't get any kickbacks here. This isn't a commercial or anything like that. I can highly, highly recommend at least LastPass, and any of these are really fantastic. You should certainly look into getting one of those today. That's it. We kept it short and sweet today so that we would have plenty of time for questions if there are any. Do we have any questions? Don't have any questions. That means that I gave just the absolute greatest presentation in the history of presentations. That's necessarily the case.
Don't sell yourself short.
We can get a question from the Goodell that started.
It's Amanda. I just sent him a question.
Oh, yep. That's my bad. Well, I'm not seeing it in chat. That's weird.
Well, Amanda, why don't you just go ahead and ask it live?
Okay, so with LastPass, how does it work with logins that you have stored on your phone? Is there an app that also works with those apps where you have logins?
So I can speak directly to that. I have an iPhone. iPhone has something called Keychain, which is their own proprietary, password vault or whatever. And it's great because it works on your iPhone. And if you have a MacBook, it works there too. And that's great, but it doesn't work for Google Chrome, for example, when I'm on my PC at work. If I have a website that I want to log into there, that does me no good. So you can have more than one of those password manager type things on your iPhone or Android or what have you. And when you are logging into something on your iPhone, you have, when it's trying to fill in your password information for you or whenever it's offering to record your password for you, once you've got them both installed, it gives you an option. Do you want to save this to Keychain or do you want to save this to LastPass? And now I've gotten in the habit of saving everything to LastPass because I know it's more universal. I can use it on any device, anywhere. So even if I go, this is kind of a stretch, but even if I went to the library, that's a computer that I never touch, I could go to the LastPass website and log in securely to my encrypted password vault using my LastPass password, and then I could get my Netflix password, my email password, my, whatever, all 150 of them are all right there. So yeah, you can certainly use it on your phone, and over a little bit of time, you'll kind of just organically end up moving most of those passwords from Keychain or whatever service you're using over to LastPass or whichever password manager tool you're using, and then you'll have them all in one place. That was a good one. What else we got?
One out there. What about, let's say you used to have something like a MySpace. You're not using it. You don't remember the password, but it's probably still out there. Are there things like that, like legacy logins that you should be worried about when it comes to your passwords?
You should be worried about.
If you kept using that password, things like that. Is there anything, or they could get information because it's it's an older account, you don't know how to change the password or get back on it. Because everything has changed so much. So are there like old logins you should be worried about ever?
Suppose that is a good point. I wouldn't ever encourage people to be more worried than most of us are in today's day and age, but that is certainly something that we have to keep into consideration. I would say that as those things occur to you, and I don't know that I would ever really recommend anyone um, make a prolonged, concerted effort to try and remember everywhere they've ever logged into. But I would say that as those things occur to you, it would be a good idea to go ahead and try and log into those old websites and see about changing the passwords or shutting down the account. Nearly every website or login in the world, even older ones like MySpace, such a great example, have a I forgot my password link. So, you can click that, and of course, it will send a reset your password link to your email address, and you can change it to, any kind of gobbledygook you want if you know you're never going to access it again. Or, of course, you could save that in LastPass in case you do feel like, getting nostalgic and going back and checking out all of your MySpace photos, or just shutting down the account if you're never going to use it again. However, that does bring me to a very good point that I failed to mention. Of all the passwords that you have, Netflix and banking and YouTube and Facebook and whatever, I would say that probably the most important password that you have, maybe only second to password manager tool password, the most important password you have is the password to your email, your personal email, because that's where all of your password resets go. So, for example, if the bad guys happen to get a hold of your email address and they know where you bank, or they just go around to all of the various different banks, randomly trying, if they can type in, CallieMarley@gmail.com at Bank of America and say, I forgot my password, well, if they have access to your email address, they can get that and reset it, and they can do that for all of your accounts. So I would certainly say, I'm a security guy, so I think everything is important here. But uh, of the most importance, your email address should have a sufficiently long and sufficiently complex password associated with it. That way, it's very, very difficult for anybody to ever gain access and then reset all of your other passwords. Make it something really long, something really complex, and then store it in LastPass and have a good password there too.
Thank you.
How we're doing on time, but how about one more question?
So good on time if we have one more question.
They just did a fantastic job with my presentation. Tony Robbins, look out. Here I come.
And of course, if any questions come up, you guys have ways of getting a hold of the GoodellNet team. So feel free to reach out. And if you have any other, specific password or security questions, we can always follow up later.
Absolutely.
Much for having me, giving me a milk crate to stand on and give my spiel.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. We really appreciate it. And then also thank you to everyone who joined. And like Callie said, if you think of any questions after the fact, which I feel like, I know I do that a lot, you leave the meeting or, you leave the webinar. And if you do think of anything, you know how to get a hold of us. So thank you so much for taking some time to join. And again, Scott, thank you very much for the extremely helpful information. And I hope everyone has a fabulous Thursday.
Thank you.